traveling away from home. I'm a long-time traveling here below to lay this body down. Farewell, kind friends whose tender care has long engaged my love. Your fond embrace I now exchange for better friends above. I'm a long-time traveling here below. I'm a long-time traveling away from home. I'm a long-time traveling here below to lay this body down. I'm a long-time traveling here below. I'm a long-time traveling away from home.
Thank you for being here. I'm so excited. Just listen to the band, man. I could just come and sit there and listen and worship and go home feeling filled up. So I'm grateful for them. I don't get to say that enough. But I'm excited about today. Those were some highlights. And maybe that's great when most people show their highlights. But a lot of times, if you're anything like me, man, life's just not all highlights. And sometimes there's no such thing as a low-light film, you know what I'm saying? And so I want to kind of help us pivot a little bit out of 2019 and into 2020. And I believe over the next couple of weeks, probably better than I'll do today, I believe that you're going to hear some pretty amazing messages that's going to help you to do that. Because here's what I know, that we don't do well. I think because we're human beings is what I think. I'm a therapist. It's how I pay my house payment and stuff like that. And the reason I get paid is people don't. We just naturally don't transition well with adversity and change in life and difficulty. We don't do that well. And sometimes we need some help. We need some navigation. We need somebody to walk us through that. And sometimes we can get a hold of some bad advice, people that don't have our best interests or don't know the Lord and understand that dynamic of what we need to transition and to navigate. So that's why God placed us together like this, is so that we can not be alone in that. So I'm excited about it, and I want you to, if you're kind of takes notes, or maybe a year from now you're looking at this, or later this week you're looking at this, that this is what I've named it. I've called it "Don't Leave Empty-Handed." Don't leave empty-handed. I'm going to kind of draw from the nation of Israel. We've done a series about following the Israelites through the desert and how they got out of bondage and all that. So I'm going to follow a little bit of that today. They had a promise from God, and we're going to it's back in Genesis chapter 12. God gives a promise to a man named Abraham, and he promises Abraham that he would have many, many descendants. And also that his descendants would have a place that he's going to prepare for them, a place called Canaan, and what we know it as the promised land that it's going to be waiting on. But Abraham had a son named Isaac, and Isaac had a son named Jacob, and Jacob had 12 sons, and one of their names is Joseph, right? His name is Joseph, and Joseph ends up in Egypt because he was sold as a slave by his brothers. They couldn't stand him. They hated him. They were jealous of him. But even though his circumstances were terrible, he still had God's favor on his life. I want to encourage you today that you can be in the middle of some pretty difficult situations and stuff going on, and God can still have his hand on you and still raise you in the middle of that. So Joseph comes to this place of importance. He works his way up. He had so much favor that he moved into positions of prominence, and he got a reputation of just being a great leader. And his family back home, back where he came from, right? His family caught wind that Joseph was a really high and respected leader. So Jacob, his father, decided to get his whole family together because he knew Joe could hook them up. Because Joseph's like the president of where he is. So Jacob says to his family, so we're going to move. We're going to pick up and go because Joseph is this big-time leader now. And we're going to pick up our family and we're going to go. We're going to go to Egypt because there's no food here. There's a lot of bad things going on. It's kind of toxic here. There's a famine going on, and they have abundance up there. So we're going to move all of our, and the Bible says they had about 70 family members, his daughters, his nieces and nephews and things like that, and they relocated to Egypt to be close to Joseph and be close to this abundance. So when they get there, everything seems to be going very, very well. They're starting to treat him like royalty when they get to Egypt because Pharaoh really liked Joseph and really valued Joseph, so they treated him like gold. So everything started out really well, right? Really well. But how many of you know that, man, just because it starts out well doesn't mean it's going to end well? Just because it starts out well doesn't mean it's going to end well. For some of us in 2019, when the ball dropped, we're like, man, I know I did this. New year, new me. I'm going to get down to size 28 jeans, and I'm going to finally hit 400 pounds in my bench press. And I had all these goals, and then by the end of 2019, it's like, the devil's been up in 2019, right? So we kind of, just because it starts well, doesn't mean it necessarily ends well. And the same thing goes for the Israelites. It started well because they started to prosper. When they got there, they started to multiply. The women were strong women, right? And they started having kids, and they were just kids that were strong kids and a lot of kids. And so they were giving birth to these hardy kids. And so God was just blessing them as a people. It started out really, really well. And all of a sudden, the rulers and the leaders of Egypt started getting insecure. They started getting concerned about all this strength of these Israelite people, and they were just growing in number and strength. And I don't know if you noticed this, but some people, they're okay with you as long as you're small and weak. But when you begin to stretch your legs a little bit, you kind of spread your wings a little bit, people start to get uncomfortable when you start to do something or you start to be something. So all of a sudden, they're not good with you anymore. And that's what's going on with the Israelites. I was like, whoa, you've gotten better and we hadn't. So the Egypt's disposition, their posture towards God's people changed. It changed just like that. So the Bible said they made them captives. That's the words they use. That's code for saying we made them slaves is what we did. That was our solution to that. And I think it's interesting to me that they went to Egypt to be saved. The Israelites went there to be saved, but while they were there, they became enslaved. And so sometimes if you're not careful, write this down. If you're not careful, the thing that saves you in one season can be the same thing that can enslave you in the next. You need to know this. What I'm getting at, where are we getting at so far? I'm trying to help you pivot. I'm trying to help you navigate through not just from this whole 2019 to 2020, but in seasons in your life. What is the perspective that you'll have? Because if you're not careful, you'll wind up getting bitter. You'll wind up getting in a place that you never meant to be, spiritually and otherwise. So sometimes the thing that saves you, this is something I watch people that are trying to follow the Lord. I think they have great intentions. The things that they crave that will save them in one season winds up enslaving them. Now, Egypt would have died. Israelites would have died of starvation in their homeland. So it became a place where they had to go to be saved. But in the next season, Egypt was where they were enslaved. And for some of you, man, that might sound like a relationship you are in or have been in. Like, I need a relationship so bad. It's going to give me what I need. I need to feel this certain way. I need to be connected to somebody. And then if you're not careful in the next season, it's the same thing that enslaves you if you're not careful. We all know this one about a job. I need a job, man. I lost my job. I need a job. Need to make some money. Man, I'll do anything. And it wouldn't be too much longer. If you don't get it right, if you don't navigate correctly, that'll be the same thing you say about that same job. You say, man, I hate my job. I want out. Y'all hiring? Right? Are y'all hiring? But sometimes God will use something to bless us in one season. It turns into a curse in the next season. And God will do that sometimes because he wants to let you know that that source is not the source. Because if you're not careful, what they probably said to themselves, the Israelites, man, we got to go to Egypt, get that grain we need. Maybe some of you, man, I got to get that career because I thought it would provide and I thought it would fulfill what I need. But God will dry it up sometimes. He'll allow it to be dried up to let you know and to remind you that it's not the source. Because people have a tendency to put their confidence in the wrong thing, So, they're in slavery, and the Bible tells us they were in slavery for 400 years. 400 years. In Exodus chapter 3, there's a famous portion of the Bible that's very famous, where God reiterates a promise that he made. Reiterates, because sometimes we have a tendency to think that when we don't see God moving, we don't see him active, that he's not working on his promises that he made for us. We'll get to thinking, I thought God had this promise for me. But look at us, we're in slavery, right? So sometimes God has to reiterate, not because he forgot his promise, but a lot of times because we forget his promise. So God will reiterate it. So he reiterates to Moses, he says, tell my people, Moses, here's what I want you to do. I want you to tell my people that just because their promise is on pause doesn't mean I'm not working on it. I'm still going to bring them out of Egypt, and I'm going to take them to a prosperous place. At the very end of chapter 3, he tells how that's going to go down. What he's going to say, what Moses is going to tell the elders of Israel, and what they're going to say to Pharaoh. And God says in chapter 3, he says, Pharaoh's not going to want to listen, but I'll raise my hand against him, and I'll bring Israel out. So there's a couple verses that stuck out to me that I want to kind of focus on for the next few minutes. Now, I want you to leave here with some hope and with better clarity. This series that we started is kind of a pun. 2020 meaning vision. Laugh at me. My vision's not real good lately. But also having clarity we're about to enter not just a new year, but a new decade. I think the next 10 years is going to be something for the history books. I really do. And I believe God's trying to prepare his people. I think he has already been preparing our people. And it might explain why some of the things that we go through, and that's what I hope to kind of point out to you for the few minutes we have left, is what you have gone through, the tough and difficult things, is preparing you for something. But if we don't know that, if we don't know that God is working on something like that, then we're just left to be bitter and frustrated to the point that sometimes we walk away from God, walk away from our faith. So these few verses stuck out to me, and I'm hoping it'll help so that you can go into 2020 with some confidence. In Exodus 3, verse 21, this is what God says to Moses. He says, I'm going to bring you out. I'm going to bring you out. I'm going to bring you out of bondage, bring you out of slavery. And that's for the Israelites. And he says the same things. Look, I'm here to bring you out of bondage and slavery. But he doesn't stop there. Because if you're a slave for 400 years, just somebody guaranteeing that you're letting you out, that should be plenty. Oh, okay, well, that's all you had to say. You're going to bring us out. But God said, no, it's not. I'm not going to stop at that. And I believe he's talking to us too. I'm not just going to bring you out of bondage, because that's not just enough for you to get out. And look at it in verse 21. And on top of bringing you out of bondage, and I will give these people such favor in the sight of the Egyptians that when you go, you will not go empty-handed. When I let you out, when I arrange it, when I orchestrate it, and it all comes together, you're not just going to be free. I'm not going to let you leave empty-handed. So when you go, you will not leave empty-handed. He's giving us a promise here. You're not going to leave empty-handed. I hope somebody hears me this morning. I know we're about to leave 2019 and go into 2020. And maybe it's been all blessings for you. Maybe everything's been going awesome, but some of us, man, we've been going through some junk. If you're like me, there's been some difficult things, and some of us can't wait for that ball to drop next week. We can't wait because maybe it's been hell for you. Maybe you're just glad this year is over. But God said, I'm not just going to bring you out. When you go, you're not going to leave empty-handed. So do me a favor, just to make sure you're engaged here. Look to your neighbor and say, don't leave empty-handed. Now, your second choice, your dead last choice, as a matter of fact, the one you chose not to talk to that time, turn to that one and say, don't leave empty-handed. You can say, hey, I'm leaving some stuff behind. I'm leaving behind some rejection and sorrow and pain. I'm leaving behind a really tough year, but I'm not leaving empty-handed. I'm not going to leave the things that I went through this year or the season I'm coming out of. I'm not going to leave empty-handed. So God says, you're going to come out with something in your hand. And so look at what they brought out. What did he put in their hand? What is he going to fill their hands up with? And I think there's something significant here. I hope this is brief enough that you can absorb all this. In Exodus 3, verse 22, here's what it is. Each woman will ask her neighbor and any women staying in her house for silver and gold, jewelry, and clothing. And you will put them on, watch this, because I'm going to come back to this, and I'm afraid you're going to forget this part. And you will put them on your sons and daughters. So you will plunder the Egyptians. That's how it's going to go down. I'm going to give so much favor to you that when you ask the people that have held you down, that have oppressed you, you're going to ask them for something. They're going to give it to you. And look at what it is. The two things that it is silver and gold, jewelry, and clothing. You're going to come out, but you're not going to come out empty-handed. On your way out, I'm going to give you something. I'm going to give you something. And that thing that was your oppressor is now your investor. It's weird. You're not going to understand how it's going to go down, but the very people who try to take you out are going to hook you up. God said, I'm going to make sure that this happened. And some of y'all need that good news that he'll use people that lied about you. He'll use people that held you down. People that meant evil, right? That meant evil for you. He's going to use them for your good. The psalmist said it like this in 23 verse 5. To give us a better picture that God, this is the psalmist saying this to God. God, this is how awesome you are. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, in their face. That's where in your face came from. All right? You ever just swish something in somebody's face and you got to say in your face, right? But you better be bigger and stronger than the person you're saying it to. You get popped in the mouth. So you prepare in your face. He goes on to say, you anoint my head with oil. That means I'm set apart. Because of you, I'm set apart. Because of our connection, because of our relationship, I'm set apart. I'm something special. I've got favor. And the psalmist goes on to say, my cup overflows. It says, you give me more than I need. And not just that, we talked about that picture of my cup overflows. What that means is when I come to your house and visit, back in these days, as long as the wine kept flowing, you were welcome there. But when the host is ready for you to go, like they've had enough of you, you're getting on their nerves, they stop pouring the wine. And that's the hint that it's time for you to go. And what this is saying is you never get tired of me. My cup overflows. I'm full of joy. I'm full of connection with you. My cup overflows. And he's saying that God will make your enemies serve you entrees. Isn't that awesome? So that's what's going on here. But I feel like some of us, man, we're trying to get out of 2019 so fast. Or maybe we're trying to get out of this season that we're in so fast. It's so full of pain. And that maybe it's a relationship. You're just trying to get away from it. And you're running out of Egypt as fast as you can. But you left some stuff behind. There's some stuff you're just trying to get away from and move on. But God says, wait, before you go, I've got some things for you that are going to be useful for you later in the next season that you have. God says, I don't want you to leave empty-handed. But some of you are going so fast just to put it behind you. Just bring the ball dry. Let's just move on. Let's just get this next year with. That you have nothing to show for what you went through. It's like you spend 400 years in bondage. You've got nothing to show for it. Nothing to show for it. So I really wanted to paint a picture here. Since we're almost in 2020, it's going to get getting used to saying that. But some of you need to go back real quick before this year's out and say, what happened to me this year? And what does God want, even though it was painful, even though it was difficult, even though it was a struggle? I need to go knock on the door. I wrote these things down. Knock on the door of your enemies, your adversaries, your opposition, your struggle, and your sickness. And just say, hey, I need my stuff. I'm not just going to be a tough year. God said you got something for me. Right? So, God said, I'm not just going to leave. I'm not just going to get you to go. I need you to get your stuff before you go. I've got some things for you. You didn't go through all that for nothing. There was something that you need to take with you. And there's two specific things that the people of Israel left with, that their enemies actually supplied them with. The first one is clothing. Clothing. I do find it comical that women, they're about to leave Egypt. They're about to come out of bondage. The first thing they need is a wardrobe. I thought that was pretty funny. It's interesting. They think they need a new wardrobe. God told them to go to their neighbor. Moses said, God said to go to his neighbors and get some clothes and some jewelry. How about that, ladies? Clothes and jewelry. I don't hear any amens. You can go tell your husband, say, the pastor said that I need some, if I'm going to really get out of bondage, I need some clothes and some jewelry. But remember I said that go to your enemy and do that, not your husband. And your husband and your enemy shouldn't be the same person. So two things, clothing and jewelry. So I want to talk about that for a minute. God says you're going to need some clothing. Where you're going is going to be unlike where you've been. It's going to be unlike that. And you've spent your entire lives, a generation, really, even though slaves, really in the fertile Nile Valley. You know what I'm saying? It's fairly comfortable, but you're about to, even though you're leaving bondage, you're leaving this thing that has oppressed you for so long, these people and this situation. You're about to walk through a desert region that has incredible heat and incredible cold, and the elements are going to be against you. You're going to have to do a lot of walking, a lot of running, and fighting some battles, and you're not clothed for that right now. And God said, so you hear what God's doing. He's saying, I love you, my people. I've got this place prepared for you, and I know you've had it rough. But just because I'm pulling you out of bondage doesn't mean that the opposition stops there. You're about to walk into another season of opposition. You're about to go into the desert. That's his people. That's who he loves. But he's saying, I've got something that's going to help you. You're not prepared the way it is right now. So the first thing God will use when he wants to use your suffering and your past and your pain, number one is preparation. When you're going through something, blind eyes, people that aren't seeing things from a spiritual perspective, when people look at it that way, you're only left with being bitter at your circumstances and at God. But God views it as, I'm preparing you for something. You're not going through this for nothing. Some of you feel that you are. But God says you're not. This is preparation. So I want you to write this down. God will use what you went through to prepare you for what you are going to go through. Sorry, I sound like I went to Huss, didn't I? Sorry. Proud graduate. Let me read it like a man. God will use what you went through to prepare you for what you are going to go through. He's going to use it. So I heard Holly mention some things that she's praying for and that she's aware of in people's lives. And people need to know. They don't have that perspective naturally. They don't. That this will be used in the future. God's teaching you patience and endurance and faithfulness. They don't know if we don't tell them, if we don't show them. But God, his plan is to use it. He'll use where you just were, whatever just happened in your life, whatever you just faced, whatever battle you just had, he's going to use them. You don't have to leave empty-handed. I know you don't want to hear this, but 2020's got some surprises for you. I know it's all good right now for some of you. You're off till the beginning of the new year. Some of you Clemson won last night, if that's a good thing. But 2020's got some stuff waiting on you. I'd like to tell you that you don't have to worry about getting laid off at work, that your relationship will be awesome. I'd love to tell you that, but let's get real. Stuff's on its way. Stuff will come. So it's not like we're going in 2020 into a context that's free from adversity, right? because the Israelites, they're leaving Egypt where they were slaves, and they won't be slaves anymore, but they're going to have to live in the wilderness for 40 years and try to survive in the desert, and they're not prepared for it. I love being prepared when I'm going on a trip, so I can kind of relate to this a little bit. Like I just went to New York City just a few days in the middle of the week. Holly, and the girls went, and I feel like a chick. This is the chick side of me. No offense, this is a compliment. Is I don't want to be cold wherever I'm going. I don't want to be too hot. So what I do is I just take everything, right? So I'm the one with the biggest suitcase usually, right? Because I don't want to be cold. I don't want to be underdressed or overdressed. Anybody like that? Right? I just like to be prepared. I guess it's the Cub Scout in me, man Scout in me. I'm sorry. It's the same way in our life. If we don't get what we need, if we don't learn what we need to learn, or we'll not be ready to face what we're going to face. So God says we need to make sure you're prepared. So preparation is part of that, where when we go through some things. Because what prepares the Israelites for the wilderness is the pain they experienced in Egypt. So they're getting ready, and God said you're going to need some clothes. You need to clothe yourself. I love that imagery there, that you're going to need some clothing. You need to put something on, something to get you through, to deal with what's coming next. Now, I started thinking about other folks in the Bible. David in the Old Testament was good at this. He understood that, what I've gone through equips me for the next season of my life. In fact, the moment when he said, I'll fight the giant, when he said, I'll fight Goliath, and the king says, what in the world makes you think that you can fight this giant? He says, because I've been through it before. So he gets this, and this is what it says. 1 Samuel 17:34. David answered Saul, your servant has been tending his father's sheep. Whenever a lion or bear came and carried off the lamb from the flock, I went after it. I struck it down, and I rescued the lamb from its mouth. And he went on to say that this uncircumcised Philistine will be just like the bear and just like the lion. And he says, because I've made it through something before. That's what. I've been prepared for this moment. I'm not prepared the first time I see it, the first time I experience it, but I've been prepared for this. I've been through something before. And how many of you know that if you're responsible for a sheep and a lion or bear comes and grabs them, that's not a good day. That's not a good day. But guess what? We're not prepared by good days. We're not prepared when everything's going well. You get best prepared on your worst days. That's what prepares you. And David said, I have some bad days in the field. I've been through some stuff, but I didn't leave empty-handed. I've lost some sheep and some bears to bears and lions. I've had some bad days. But now I didn't leave that empty-handed. My experiences. Now I'm ready. My experiences have me prepared. Now Paul in the New Testament, he understood this too. Paul in Acts, I think it's 23, somewhere in there. Paul, he had been shipwrecked. He had been beaten. This is somebody that was dedicated to the Lord. I mean, he encountered Jesus, and his life was changed. I mean, just radically. And he was devoting the rest of his life to being a follower. And Paul had been shipwrecked. He'd been left for dead. He'd been beaten. He'd been thrown in prison. Been lied on. Now he's on his way to go to Rome to stand trial just for talking about Jesus in public. And the ship he was on, it was on its way to Rome. He's shackled inside of that. And something in the sea, we don't know if it's a sand barge or whatever it was, they went crashing into it, and their ship started sinking, him and a bunch of other prisoners. So they had to doggy paddle to shore. And luckily, the guards wanted to just kill him. By the grace of God, they didn't kill him. He made it ashore. And they came to a place he found out to be called Malta. Malta, and the natives there were really kind, the Bible says, and they had prepared a fire. And Paul comes to the fire, and it's been a terrible year, and it's almost like the ball dropped, like, okay, finally, 2020. For him, it's like, God, finally off that ship. Now I'm going to sit here, and here's a warm fire for me. But in that moment, the Bible says that while he was warming his hands and body by the fire, trying to get unwaterlogged, this snake, the Bible says a viper, which means it's poisonous, it'll kill you. This snake came and didn't just bite him, it attached itself to him. And the Bible goes on to say that he shook it off. That's what he did. It bit him, it hung there, and he shook it off. Acts 28, that's it. Acts 28 verse 5 says, but Paul shook the snake off into the fire and was unharmed. How do you shake off a snake? A poisonous viper. And I'm going to tell you how. It's when you've been through so much before, something like a snake, you're like, just get off of me, man. I'm used to this. See what I'm saying? You're not caught by surprise because, look, things are going to happen. And it's meant to prepare you. So if that was his first little thing, he wasn't beaten, he wasn't in prison, he wasn't shipwrecked, that would have freaked him out. But he's like, you know what? Devil, you're going to have to do better than that, man. You just shake it off. That's how you're able to do that, where you get to the place where you can just shake it off. But if you didn't get what you needed in 2019, if you can't look back and have learned something and have asked God to reveal to you what's going on, if you don't do that, you're not going to be ready for the next thing that comes down. If a snake bites you, you're not going to be ready. So look at the last part of Moses' speech here, one of his last speeches to his people, here in Deuteronomy 29, verse 5, because we're talking about clothes. Clothes are important. So you're going to need some clothes, and I'm going to give them to you on your way out of bondage, but you're going into a new season. It's going to be hard. This is years and years and years later. He's talking about the clothes. He says, yet the Lord says, during the 40 years that I have led you through the wilderness, your clothes did not wear out, nor did the sandals on your feet. 40 years. That's God talking about their clothes. The clothes I gave you, the ones that I arranged for you to get, that still serve you 40 years later. And not only they're still around, they didn't wear out. And that's pretty miraculous, because Egypt's, at the time, the most wealthiest country in the world. Which means when the Israelites were rolling out, their clothes weren't from Walmart. You know what I'm saying? Nothing wrong with Walmart. Let's face it, Walmart ain't lasting 40 years. You know what I'm saying? It's not from the thrift store. God had arranged this. So when you walk through suffering, what God puts on you, it can handle whatever you face in the next season. God's doing something through your struggle. I know that's not popular. I know sometimes it's hard to see that. But when he does it, when he clothes you, there's something that comes with that, some power, some anointing, and you are separated. You are special when that happens. So write this down. You'll never walk in your promise until you learn to wear your problems. When you learn to wear your pain, what I've been through. When God's got something for you, something's going to get you off track if you're not careful. You're going to misinterpret what you're going through, misinterpret your pain and your problems. You got to get this, especially this part. Remember when it said, get the clothes and put them on your children. Children. What you go through when you suffer, when you teach them how to navigate through suffering and difficult times, you're putting clothes on your kids. You're providing for them. And I want to take this opportunity to say, listen, in our church, I don't know how everybody else is doing it, but I want you to feel the weight of making sure your children are in the house of God. I know you wouldn't put it this way. I know you wouldn't frame it this way. But what we teach our children, when we have something that competes with the house of God once a week, we are communicating to them a lack of priority for God's house. Now, you came today and you brought your kids, so I'm preaching to the choir. We don't have a choir, we're not having a choir. Please don't ask. We also tell the world that church is not important. And what happens when, I know parents, they just want their kid to experience, I just want them to, you got to work all the time, I just want them to experience the best. And you have to get out of here sometimes. Sometimes. But not to the point where your kid is saying, the Sundays I have the most fun is when I'm not at church. I just want to tell you lovingly that and humbly do that, to say that to you. We have to clothe our kids. We have to make sure that they understand how to deal with difficulty, and we teach them. And we point to God when we say the house of the Lord is important. So don't forget your clothes. So the women said, we need some clothes and we need some jewelry. Now, what do you need jewelry for camping? Y'all about to go into the wilderness, the desert. What do you need some earrings and rope necklaces for? What do you need that for? But the Bible says that they were given so much favor that they gave them their jewelry. And I started thinking, I get the clothes. They need the clothes because of the heat and the weather and battles. I get that. But what do they need the jewelry for in the desert? And I read Exodus 35. And God's explaining to Moses that he's got a hope for I want a closer relationship, Moses, with my people. I want a closer, and so he wants him to meet in a place all together. And it would be called, you'll read about it, is the tent of meeting is what they called it. The only problem was there wasn't such a place. There wasn't a tent of meeting. So that had to be constructed. So this is what God says to Moses, and then Moses tells the people. Exodus 35, verse 4. Then Moses said to the entire Israelite community, this is what the Lord has commanded. Take up an offering among you for the Lord. And by the way, this is only a few weeks away from them being freed, being out of bondage. I know it's 30-some verses, but it's only about a few weeks, 3 or 4 weeks maybe. And he's asking a bunch of newly freed slaves for an offering. Good luck with that, Moses, right? It goes on to say in 35 verse 21, everyone whose heart was moved and whose spirit prompted him came and brought brooches, earrings, rings, necklaces, and all kinds of jewelry. The Lord had said, don't leave empty-handed. And they didn't. They got clothes and they got jewelry. But what you go through, what you're given when you go through something, it's not just for preparation, it's also for praise. It's also for praise. We're going to build a tabernacle. We're going to build a place of worship, a place to worship God. But to do that stuff, we need gold and we need silver. We need I know you're a bunch of slaves. You're thinking, wait a minute, on our way out, God gave us some things. He gave us clothes. He protected us. And he also gave us jewelry so that we could worship with it. So they could build a place to meet God. And it's not just about the money. It's not just about the gold and the silver. But when they had their gold and silver and their clothes, it was a reminder of what they had been through. And they were going to worship with that. Read this in 1 Peter verse 6. It says, in all this is bad stuff. Go back and read the verses before that. In all this you greatly rejoice. Even though you've been through all of these things, you greatly rejoice. Not after all this, but in all this. Though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. Sounds like a lot of people in 2019. In verse 7 it says, these have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise. It's saying that what you went through is valuable. I'm almost done. What you went through is valuable. It's more valuable than gold. And when you bring it to me, when you bring what you've gone through to me, it's more valuable. It can't be measured. What God does is when he gives us, when we have that pain that happens, that struggle, that difficulty, and we bring it to him, it's like it is worth, he considers that worship to him. God, I'm struggling. God, I'm hurting. But God, you provided for me the whole time. I'm still going to demonstrate faithfulness. Sometimes God gives us something like, in their case, gold and silver. Sometimes he gives us things just so we'll give it back to him.